much, Chandana, and I hope you can all hear me clearly. I'd like to first begin with a small errata, if you don't mind. I think the Music Academy would be pretty upset to hear that I was its founding members.
One of the founding members? No,
no, that's okay, Chandra, don't worry. It's just, I'm just saying, you know, because it was formed in about 1927, 28. Oh. And I was kind of born around 1976, so just the logistical possibility of me being the founding member is ruled out. But nevertheless, thank you very much for a generous introduction, and thank you, Manthan, for inviting me again. It's always a pleasure to come back here, albeit this time it's virtual rather than physical in Hyderabad. So thank you all. Among all the arts that have been discussed by thinkers, philosophers across the globe, irrespective of which culture they really belong to, most of them, and many of them, including people of literature, seem to give music a kind of a special status. You always hear about music having that elusive quality, that it has a connection with the soul, with the inner being, with the emotions. And it's always placed, whether it's Plato, whether it is Shakespeare, whether it is the thinkers in India, whether it is, the whole idea of music has around it a glow that is somehow very different from how we even think of the other art forms, whether it's the plastic art forms, movement, dance. And we have to wonder why. Why is it that music is given this exalted status, this special quality? Of course, we have to ask also whether it's true. One of the most elusive aspects of music is it really doesn't have a physical form, does it? You can't hold it in your hands. It doesn't stay with you in a physical sense, in a tactile, temporal sense, but it's always with you. I mean, everybody knows a tune. I mean, the idea of somebody being tone deaf is actually a misnomer, because everybody listens to some rhythm. Rhythm is also music. You tap your feet, it's music. You hear the train. Every one of us who have traveled by train have heard that lovely momentum that the train has, whether it's in fives. I'm a musician, so I think in numbers. So it's fives or fours, or the switch between a 5 and 4 when the track moves from this track to the other track, that little misstep, which is almost as beautiful. And it's your lullaby when you sleep at night. When you sleep on a train, that sound of rhythm is your lullaby. But you can't hold it in your hands. You can sleep. You can be in deep slumber to the background score of that. And this makes music so difficult to grapple with, to ask difficult questions of. Because somewhere it's that silence in music. People always use that expression, silence in music, and I often think that we have misunderstood that. We think it is actually the literal silence between two notes. No, it isn't. It is the inner silence when you listen to the music. And it doesn't matter what music you listen to, whether it's rock and roll, whether it is Karnatik music, whether it is Western popular music, whether it's cinema music, there is that inner feeling of comfort, feeling of belonging, feeling of connection. You cry without knowing why you cry. You laugh because you just laugh. Imagine one tone makes you laugh. Isn't that such a fascinating idea? And this means that actually music, you don't need to explain to anybody about the music you listen to. Nobody has in fact, you could wonder whether anybody has a right to have a conversation about that. I love this music, I listen to this. It's the sonic waves, and I listen to it. So the very fact that it doesn't require explanations to experience it also means somewhere that it remains unquestioned. That it is not beyond a point you don't ask difficult questions of it. You can ask questions that are on the surface, and you can probably discuss it over dinner, but it stops there. But ultimately you go back before you sleep, and if you're used to listening to music in your ears, you plug in the earphones and still listen to the same music. So Just look at the word. I'm speaking now. Even the idea of word meaning changes the moment I sing a word. Me saying a word, me singing a word are two different beings. Recently, we just lost a wonderful singer in S.P. Balasubramaniam, one of the greatest, in my book, the greatest playback singers this country has had. And there is a quality about him that is connected to what I'm saying now, the idea of the musical word. Everybody says he sang in so many languages, how did he adapt? And it's actually not about knowing the language in a linguistic sense. It's about knowing the language in a sonic sense. If I speak Telugu, it's very different from when I sing Telugu. The word elongates in a different manner. The liberties the aesthetic bandwidth of liberties that a singer takes with a word, a speaker will never take with a word. S.P. Balasubramaniam had this incredible quality of knowing the entire oral form of a word in different languages. And let's add one more layer to that, the idea of dialect. You add that layer, and then the word starts multiplying in its sonic meanings, in how it touches you when it is in melody and rhythm, and when the vowels and the consonants talk to each other in imaginative ways that no spoken word, not even the word itself knew, existed. This is the magic of music. So, when you ask difficult questions of music, it's very difficult for people to reconcile the possibility that music can be disturbing. That within the beauty, there could be a lot of ugliness. And what we forget very often is that most of our discriminative markers, the markers that we are conditioned with, that we are born with, are actually not in the literal things that we do or in the practical things. We always discuss about these things in the practical way. For example, access to education or healthcare. These kind of conversations are often had. What about what you feel? What about what your face says? Somebody comes in the front of your door, you open the door. You and the individual know exactly how the other person feels of the other. You've not said a word. You've not done anything. It could be just a hand gesture. It could be just a smile or the lack of it. It could be a glare. These are feelings that are embedded deeply in the inner chambers of our minds and our hearts. So we forget very often that that's where it lies. And isn't that the chamber where music lies too? Are they very similar chambers? That inner chamber where you think a color is ugly. Why do you think it's ugly? You think somebody is beautiful. You don't think another person is beautiful. You like this song and you don't like the other song. Somehow, I know a few people listening to this say, no, it's not the same. I'm sure they're telling themselves. But I'm going to tell you, maybe just think about it. It's not very different. It's not very different from what you find beautiful or what you listen to. So it's that's why you need to ask questions of these markers that you have, these non-physical markers that we feel. Because unless we challenge what we feel, we can't challenge what we build. Because we are constantly talking about what we have built outside. But what about how we feel inside? Irrespective of which section of society you come from. Whether you're the person who's a target of these feelings or the person who's placing these feelings on others. This is the inner chamber of inner chambers, and music has a very, very important place there. And that's why I'm asking those questions. Because I sing. I believe music is that panacea. It is that act of goodness. Will anybody say music is an act of violence? You would not naturally say it. It's an act of goodness. It gives us happiness. It gives us pleasure. It reprieves me from all that I experience from morning to evening. I've heard other people say, I listen to music because after a difficult day, after the horrible things that happen, I sing. You go and ask the fisher folk why they sing well, you have motorboats today, but there was a time when they used to physically row. You ask them, what is the song of the fisher folk? And they will tell you they sang because they forgot the pain of rowing. But they didn't sing only because of that. They also sang because they saw the sky. They saw the birds. They heard the sound of the waves. Their music is intermingled. So in this very amorphous, very connective, very inner and outer experience of music, we rarely ask the difficult, challenging questions. Even the musician who sings in funeral and who's marginalized will tell you, music is still for me something that gives me not just earnings or a job. I'm the person who will tell you I am marginalized, I am discriminated against, but yet I sing. Because when I sing, there is something that happens inside. But what I'm getting to is that it is very possible, it's very real, that the very sound, the very tune, the very raga, the very cadence that makes you cry could be a result of violence, could be participating actively in discrimination, in keeping people away, in deciding who belongs. And this conundrum of conflicting states is what we are trying to grapple with, and what I continue to grapple with as a musician. As far as exploitation and violence and discrimination goes, if you're talking about the persons or the individuals, then you can discuss it socio-politically, about communities, about people, about the inner and the outer. But there's also another way, where the sound itself affirms something, where the sound itself erases something, where the change in the sound tells you somebody disappeared, or the change in the melody tells you this person became more important. We never think of that. Let me think of a or for example, the sound reminds you of things. I mean, a very, very overt example, to make it simple at this point, is Wagner. To the people who are Jewish, Wagner is the sound of violence. It's the sound of the Holocaust. It's beautiful music, by the way. If you and I listen to it, we never experience any of the violence. We don't have memory, we don't cry. Even if you're of the generation who belong to the Holocaust period, you still carry those markers of violence in the music of Wagner. The music of Wagner is violent. Can we also imagine it as possible that when I sing a Tyagaraja Kirtana, for somebody else, it could be a marker of oppression? It could be, can't it? It could be saying things that I never thought it says. To me, I've lived with it. I'm born with it. I sing it every day. I love the words. I love the music. But could it be that every time the sound of Karnatic music wafts into the home of somebody who has been kept far away from its precincts, that music tells that individual that you don't belong, tells that individual that you don't have music, tells that individual this is more important, these people are more important. This is the reality of culture. This is the reality of music, where it's even more complicated because you don't see anything. It just comes, it stays, and it leaves an imprint, many times manipulating our own mental states. But what about within the world itself? We will come to the rest of the world. The production, or I've used the word production very purposefully here, and you will know why very soon. The production of the music. You go to a concert. You listen to musicians sitting on stage. You have a wonderful evening. Is that act an act of cohesiveness? Is that act an act of equality? Is that act an act of sharing? You still enjoy it. Nobody will ever argue that. But what happens behind it? What are the manipulations that are going on between the individuals sitting on stage? When is one individual telling the other, don't play anymore, and you don't even know the individual is saying it? You can ask, why should I care? Should I ask that question? Ultimately, what I hear is wonderful. But shouldn't you care that what you enjoyed could have been an act of suppressing somebody while you enjoyed it? Shouldn't you care that in fact it's possible, very possible, your enjoyment was enhanced by the suppression of another individual? So what does it say about your experience? What does it say about the act? I'm not here to give you any answers to anything I'm saying today, because there are no answers to anything I'm saying. There are just complications. Because as a musician sitting on stage, I know we do it. And it's not just about X form or a Y form. It's about the very production of music. It's about human beings. It's about egos. It is about power. I sit right at the center of the stage. I am the star. My colleagues on stage are my accompanists. You know, there is a word we use in Karnatic music for the accompanist, which is pakkavadyam. And there is another word that is used for the ghatam or the ganjira artist, which is upapakkavadyam. What do these titles say about the individual, their participation? In fact, now a lot of my colleagues don't like the word upapakkavadyam. They take great offense to it, by the way. Most people don't know. Organizers don't care. They still do it. Because they're saying, okay, we are fine with pakkavadyam, which means we are we are co-musicians, we are colleagues, we are supporting, we are sharing, we are contributing together. But when you place us as upapakkavadyam, that we are accompanists of the accompanists, what are you saying about what we are? What are you saying about our activity on stage? How much do we matter? Look at how we sit down. Does that say something about us? The ghatam artist would sit at a place where most of the times you can't see the individual. Does that say something? Should it say? Should we not care? Should the entire performance be far more fluid, that we really are talking about in a democracy, the idea of equality and equity? Does it have any role in the production of music on stage? In the power dynamics? You know, you can always argue and say, but this is there everywhere, Mr. Krishna. You have a boss and you have a subordinate. But then, what is the mechanism through which, if you have an organization where there's no mechanism through which this can be challenged, ideas can be challenged, where respect is the basis of even that structural form, there is a problem. Even if it's a corporate house, even if it is a thinking body, even if it is an NGO, and even if it is a stage on which music is being made. But here, there is no mechanism through which these questions can be asked. Of course, the identity of the individuals involved in this conversation is deeply, deeply discriminative in terms of caste, gender, and if it's any other form, it's also race, it's color, it's etc. There's a wonderful article recently written by Alex Ross, and I would urge all of you to read it, in the New Yorker, about racism in Western classical music. And it was a beautiful article because it spoke about the need for the form to recognize its racist nature. The need for the form to not just look at the past, but also celebrate the people, African Americans, and today even the Asians, who are involved in this art form. And it was a conversation of the past and the present. Do we have these conversations in the world of art in India? Have we had this conversation? We use very interesting excuses to propagate both gender violence, caste violence in the art forms of India. If you're a person participating in an art form that belongs to the high echelons of social hierarchy, you're most likely 99.9% going to be of the so-called upper caste. If you're a woman in the world of these art forms, then you're definitely conforming to greatly oppressive patriarchal structures. And that's a reality of today, not something I'm talking about 50 years ago. But so how does all this play out in your experience? You go to a concert, you're enjoying the music. Are you asking questions on why are the identities of every one of us sitting in the audience and stage exactly the same? Don't you find it claustrophobic? I ask the question to the liberals too, the very same question. Because the same liberals will give us a lecture and more about how you need representation in a panel discussion. Am I asking this representation when I listen to music? Am I asking for that representation when I'm going to looking at the demography of an audience? I'm rarely doing that, am I? Isn't that true? So how does one look at these realities? And then, words and music are fascinating beings. Almost, they have their own lives. In spite of all this, they find their ways to travel. There's a word I would use, and I would sometimes travel to a completely different place. I don't recognize the word because it belongs to a different culture. It belongs to a different sound. Its sound form changes. Simple thing as often and often, we know, are two different beings. In fact, if I said often today, you would react to it. Instinctively react to it. Just by the sound of the word. Music is like that. In spite of all this, it seeps. It kind of finds its way and, escapes through all these constructions and creates different narratives. But all the narratives are not treated equally. So if you look at, for example, Karnatic music, there's one community that we never discuss about when we discuss about Karnatic music. That's Sri Lankan Tamils. If there is one community that has safeguarded Carnatic music, and to them Carnatic music sung in Tamil, because Tamil is also something that's very, very close to their identity, is celebrated across the globe. Go to Switzerland, go to Canada, go to Southeast Asia. Most of the schools teaching Carnatic music are run by Sri Lankan Tamils, expats. Where are they placed in the environment, in the whole ecosystem of Carnatic music? How many Sri Lankan Tamils have you heard singing Carnatic music on the proscenium famous stages? Where is their aesthetic, cultural aesthetic part of this world? It's only faces like me that's determining this. It's faces like me who are having this conversation. Isn't that also true? What does this say about the sound that we enjoy? What does it say about the sounds that we don't even recognize? Even within one art form, then just extrapolate what I said to the larger world of sound, the world of sound. And something I said yesterday at another talk, and I want to say it again. Even the idea of singing in tune is not universal. What seems in tune for you would be out of tune for me. When even the idea of being in tune or being in pitch is so diverse between cultures, between sounds and music, how do we create these hierarchies on what is more sophisticated, what is more subtle, what requires more effort, mind you, what requires rigor? We actually have no basis to make many of these equivalences that we constantly do. In all this, what about the learning of the music itself? And I think it's very relevant in today's conversation, because over the last 2 years, we've had many, many complaints about sexual harassment in the world, in the so-called classical world, whether it is Carnatic music or recently, for example, in Hindustani music. Where does that exist in you experiencing the music? And it's not just sexual violence that we should stop with. It's abuse of various orders, abuse during learning, which is part of a cultural happening. And in that state of violence, music is transferred, beauty is created and shared. All this is coexisting. I expect so many things of my student. I abuse my student in so many different ways, and it's not just a question of sexual harassment, it's a structural issue. But we have this very close to our heart idea of the guru and shishya, don't we? The moment I use that word, at least most people listening to this conversation will imagine, even if you never went to a school where you learned music or informal arts where this happens, you still have that notion. But do we ask a question of justice there? Is the guru-shishya structure structurally problematic? You can't have a structure that only functions if there are good people in it. So any of you thinking of the wonderful times you had with your guru, erase that off right now. It's not about you and me. I had a wonderful time with my teacher. But what about the structure itself? Does it need only good people for it to be enabling? Is it otherwise fundamentally flawed? Is it a way by which, does it allow for abuse of various orders? Does it celebrate abuse? Does it celebrate a non-questioning mind? These are questions we should ask about the way we create musicians, those very musicians that we love and that we listen to, or those very tunes that we enjoy? Are we listening to the sorrow of the student sometimes and crying without knowing when the musician is singing? Do we wonder? We don't know. But this leads to us to that other very, very thorny issue between the music and the musician. Mr. Krishna, should we just separate the two, you can ask me. Why conflate these two issues? The musician is independent, the music is independent. Is it as simple as that? Can you keep it separate? Or can you complicate your experience by looking at it together and seeing how they interlay each other, and how by understanding it in a more complicated, more messy fashion, you may listen to a different music. You may listen to music that is closer to all the qualities that we ask of ourselves as human beings. I said production of music for the performance of music, and now I'm going to say making of the music for the person who makes the instrument. And this inversion is very, very deliberate. Because in the world of art, the production of the instrument is considered not a musical act. It's an act of bringing things together accidentally, just through practice, doing it repeatedly. At some point of time, the person who's making the instrument just knows how to get it right. And then, of course, we, the musicians, tell him. This is our mind frame of the instrument maker. And recently I worked a lot on one instrument maker, the people who make the mridangam. And as you begin conversations with them, as you learn from them, many of the mridangam makers, for those who don't know, belong to Dalit communities. A large portion are Dalit Christians, but they are, you'll find them all over South India, whether it is Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, or Kerala. And they're all marginalized. This is a large topic, I'm not going into the details, but there's one marginalization that I want to specifically talk about, because very important in this idea, is the marginalization of the mind, the marginalization of knowledge, of value. I found it very interesting that many people, most upper caste people, who their problems with the book I wrote, came with one problem, which they presumed, some thought so, is why is Mr. Krishna creating an equivalence between the instrument maker and the musician? I found it fascinating that it troubled somebody. That, first, I didn't create an equivalence, but that's a different topic. But the fact that it troubled people was intriguing for me, because it was not just some intellectual thing that bothered them. It was emotional. That somewhere the value of knowledge or the structure of knowledge told them that the artistry of the musician is knowledge, and the making of the instrument was skill, was practice, was repetitive act, guided repetitive act. It of course requires some instinctive capacities. You must know which cow skin to use, you must know which buffalo skin to use, you must know how to stretch it, etc., etc. But it can't be the same as the musician on stage who creates these magical worlds, can it? And that was challenged. And I'm glad it was challenged. Because there is a problem. Because the way we hierarchize knowledge is something we have to challenge here in the world of music too. When is something knowledge? What is the epistemology of these creations? How do we create respect? Does it depend on who creates the knowledge? If I wrote a book, for example, I write a book, I'm an upper caste man writing a book on mridangam making. Does it become knowledge now? Does it become part of social science now? But if the mridangam maker speaks about the making every day for the last 100 years, it's not knowledge, it's habit, it's practice, it's skill, it's not art. It's the artisan, not the artist. So where is the instrument maker in the sound that you hear? I always, after spending time with them, I say the first person who creates music on that instrument is the maker of the instrument, not the musician. And if the maker did not know how to give you that tone, you can be the greatest stalwart in the world. You'll collapse. And this was argued in many different ways. One was always brought in, what about, look at Stradivarius. That required a lot of work. He had an independent mind. He didn't need a violinist to tell him what to do. But here the mridangam maker does not have that. It's just a question of doing something. And the mind is all again wholeheartedly gifted to the musician who plays on stage. And the mind of the maker is removed. It's a complete separation. It's a violent act of dismembering an individual of thought, mind, work, and understanding. But we do that so casually. So knowledge in music is also a place where this ugliness plays out. So when it is knowledge, it also seeps into the tune. It seeps into what you would accept as knowledge. What does the Shastra say? We are an unusual set of people. We celebrate the oral tradition, we celebrate the non-written tradition, but we want a Shastra. Ones that don't have Shastra don't have a mind. They just did something habitually. They did something without thinking. And so what tune you sing, what tune you're accustomed to think is beautiful, is also, shall we say, curated and manipulated by us who decide whether that is knowledge of value or not. By us who decide whether you should know the mridangam maker or not. By us who decide whether that music is music and this music is noise. And finally, a couple of thoughts. I think I have about five minutes.
You have time, Krishna.
Okay,
so
thank you.
Please carry on.
Thank you. So, but every one of these conversations become very difficult in art, in music, because it's entirely in the experience. I have now tried to separate them, but as I do it, I know and you're still wondering, but what about the experience? Because that's still something that you treasure, right? So it's very difficult to talk about these ideas of equality and justice and sharing and the ethical values of living within something that's an experience. Just because you know the nuts and bolts and me separating things that happen on stage doesn't change the fact you will still go aha. Right? So we talk about intangible heritages. If there is an intangible among the intangible heritages, it's probably music. Right? So unless there is a material issue, unless there is a material challenge, most of the injustice which is in the sound, which is in the experience, will go entirely unnoticed. And the tragedy here is that most of the times the material effect happens much later, much after the music is lost, much after the dance is gone, much after an interpretation is forgotten. So by the time you're working with community and with people and with the material issues that you need to challenge and you question, everybody has lost it. Everybody has lost it. And the greater tragedy is that the people who are asking these questions and who are being enabled by the larger social, political, democratic setup have also been trained to succumb to the aesthetic constructions that have come out of abuse of them. Just listen to me carefully. I am the person who has been suppressed, who is oppressed, hypothetically of course, and at some point of time, society and my own affirmation, we recognize that this shouldn't happen because of material happenings. But by the time we have moved to that state, even I have been trained to think that tune that my grandfather or grandmother sang is not correct. It's not music. Or that style, or that kind of music that we as a community present is not as good as something else. This thought process, this aesthetic differentiation, this aesthetic demarcation, discrimination is already imbued into my life, not just the life of the oppressive, dominant majority. How does one recover from this? We cannot recover from this. Which is why we need to ask questions about experience. Because then it's now. If you ask questions about your experience now, if you ask questions why you're uncomfortable that the knowledge of the mridangam maker needs to be understood, you need to spend time. Then you realize that you can actually begin this conversation much before realizing it in a tactile world. Much before that. Because what I'm actually asking of ourselves is to question our judgments, question our predisposition. There's another word that was used by a young person a couple of days ago. He said, Mr. Krishna, do you believe in the merit of art? And I found that a fascinating question. Because how overlapping is it from the question that is asked on merit and affirmative action and reservation? And for the first time, I heard that word being used in the world of music or art. And the person said, do you believe in the merit of art, or do you believe that? So I said, what do you mean by the merit of art? Is there an overarching notion of merit? Is the space, the place, the position of the art form, meaning the community and the holders of the art form, not part of that conversation? Is it also not that within an art form you could have a question of varieties of understandings and differentiations and interpretations like, but could you have it between two different art forms? Yeah, one of the other arguments will be this notion of complexity, even within an art form. That's too simple. It doesn't challenge my mind, especially among the upper caste communities, where we have this notion of complexity. When we want simplicity, and when we want complexity. We cherish simplicity when we do it. When it is done by somebody else, it's too simple and not intellectual enough. Where is the merit in all this? Where is this notion of merit? So it was fascinating that somebody actually placed this kind of a word in front of me in the context of art. And when I titled this talk Just Music, of course it was a play on just music and justice in music. So is it just music you're listening to? Whose music are you listening to? Are you listening to your own music? Do you choose your music based on that just music? Do you discard music based on that? Do you remain blind to the justice in music? What do we do? What do we all do? And we have to explore this, because sometimes even things like caste are given positions of being knowledge bearers. I've heard ridiculous argument, and I call them ridiculous, how caste should also be seen a way by which it carried forward knowledge. If there was no caste system, you would not have people carrying forward this knowledge system that this community practiced over years. There can't be something more incorrect as an observation and more oppressive as an observation. First, who is making that observation? Who is making that observation? And the whole notion that diversity in participation does not actually change ideas of tradition, that it probably carries forward things that you never thought could have happened. That respect, when respect is lacking in something that is carried forward for generations and generations, then it is not something to be celebrated. So we have to ask these questions when we listen to music. We can't use social arguments conveniently whenever it suits our progressive mindset, and discard them when we want to stay within the comforts of pleasing melodies. So when we ask for justice, and justice is one of those words which is very difficult to actually explain. You could talk about it in terms of a law, a book, a code. But, justice is probably more understood in trying to understand what injustice is. Dharma is more understood in understanding what is adharma. And somewhere it's there we will find what it is. And the word dharma is beautiful. I don't know whether people know, it is actually one of the epithets for Yama, dharma. And you wonder why. Maybe death is the truth. Maybe there cannot be a hiding from it. Maybe you can't be lost in the melodies so much that you don't recognize death. Maybe that's the ultimate act of recognizing truth. And somewhere justice is the seeking of truth. Yeah, it is a moral reflection. It is impartiality. It's all that. But it's a seeking of something more inner. The inner truth. So what's the inner truth of the Raga Kamboji? What's the inner truth of Beethoven's symphony? What's the inner truth of the Pare artist who dances and sings in gay abandon in incredible fashions? The inner truth is muddled in all these questions I asked. In the performance, in the belonging, in the space, in the societal framework, in our experience of it, in our presumption of beauty, and in all this. So when you seek justice, you have to seek justice in the experience, because justice is also something you feel. Most of the things we treasure are abstract ideas. You can have books, but you feel it. Because you find justice in the experience. You find justice in what you feel, not just in a law book. There's a fairness about it. And the fairness is not just about the person who is fair, but the person who is more important, that the person who is receiving it says it's fair. And that comes from respect. And also comes from a selflessness, which means as an experience of music, I'm not being selfish about the pleasure that the music gives me. It comes from the courage to say, maybe this pleasure is problematic. Because ultimately, we should believe that truth does matter. I'll end with translations of few of the edicts of Ashoka. And they're written, of course, in Magadhi. And some of the scripts, one of the scripts was Prakrit, but this is in Magadhi. I'm not going to read the Magadhi, but I'm going to read a translation. There is no gift like the gift of justice, like the celebration of justice, like participating in justice. And he goes on to say in another edict, he asks the question, what is harmony? He says harmony is listening to reflections on justice. Listening to another's reflection on justice. That's so important. Not my reflection on justice. Listening to reflections on justice. Listening to another's reflection on justice. And then he says something. And listening to that willingly. So let's listen to the music, to the just music. Thank you.
Thank you, Krishna. As always, you push us into a world inside us and question our own stand on various issues, to ask uncomfortable questions about our own judgment on music. And I think that is a beginning to understand the magic of music. And this is something only which you can do, to ask us to look inward. And thank you very much. In fact, the first time I made a distinction in my mind that can music be disturbing. I always used to associate that with bad music, but not with the sense of feelings of music. And last comment I would make before I shift the question is that I think this format of Samvad also doesn't help, because I can see the chat here and there are some zillion questions here, and this is going to take a lifetime to answer. But we will try and get the essence of these questions to you and see in the next 15 minutes how much. The first question is that there's an interesting question on child prodigies. When you are asking him to play the music, are you depriving him of his childhood? And isn't that as important as the music itself? Is it fair to the child?
Oh, it's a very important question. The presumption that we make often is that if the child had childhood, the musician wouldn't have happened. We presume that childhood would have stolen the genius of the genius. So we have to challenge that notion first, that childhood needs to be lost for greatness, or a presumed notion of greatness. And I think there is something very disturbing in that whole conceptual framework. That, I can give you many stories. I mean, the great flautist Mali is a very classic case of somebody who was taken from town to town like a circus clown and made to play. He was a genius. I mean, that's different. But in Mali's case, you could say, in retrospect, looking at his life and looking at his struggles as an individual and the alcoholism that he went into, that a lot of these are markers in his life. They were all markers. So the question is, who are we asking this question for? Is it for our own selfishness? Or is it about that individual? Who do we care about? And that's the question we should ask. So I think first the presumption that childhood would rob somebody of beauty in music is something I will completely negate.
It's wonderful. I've heard Shujat Ali Khan also saying that if I have to live this life again, I wouldn't put in those years and years of practice, and I don't want my son to do the same. There's another question there. How does anyone involved in cultural practice enable this space for the subaltern, instead of oppressing them, the process of liberating them? I think what he wants to say is that is it a process of liberation or is it a process of oppression?
Okay, the first thing is anybody thinking they're liberating anybody else is oppressing that person. I think that's the first recognition you need, because it's famously called the savior syndrome, right? But it's problematic. Let me talk personally here, because I come from every privilege. I come from the Brahmin caste. I'm a man. I speak English. I get all the access that you require. And now I'm having a conversation about caste. Now let's look how problematic that is. Okay, and it's very important that I recognize that it is something. It is like a man constantly talking about feminism and talking about feminist movements, or being a feminist within quotes, right? Because the power imbalance in that is a reality, how much ever you say. So what you're doing is not liberating anybody, you're not saving anybody. Actually, at one level, it's also a selfish act, isn't it? Because somewhere you're trying to find some honesty in yourself. That's what you're fundamentally trying to do at one level. But at the other level, what you're trying to also do, hopefully do, is create spaces for you to be challenged. That's what you should think. That engaging in discrimination as a person of privilege, you are placing yourself and placing your ideas to be challenged, which means there is respect, which means there's an enablingness of equality in the conversation, and it could be that you may be told to shut up, and you have to shut up. That's important.
There's a question here which says, jazz music and musicians like Aretha Franklin had a major influence in the end of segregation. Do you see such parallels happening in India?
Well, without going to the parallel, because I think there's also social structure that makes it a little more complicated for India. I mean, the entire Dalit movement in India is a musical movement. Let's remember that when we talk about music and its role directly in political, social change, it's always from the world of the subaltern, from the world of the marginalized, that it is active. Because those are communities that want to be heard, want to challenge you and me. So they use every possible aesthetic frameworks, whether it is visual, whether it's literature, whether it is music. So in fact, the most wonderful political music has around the world come from communities, the Dalit community here, the African American community, the indigenous communities in other parts of the world. So I do see music as, I mean, there are some wonderful bands today. Please go listen to the Casteless Collective from Tamil Nadu, listen to Arivu, listen to Yalgar, who they sing. Listen, there are so many bands who are across this country saying very important things, challenging patriarchal structures, caste structures, religious demarcation, something I forgot to speak about today, which is also important in this conversation. And therefore, it's always there. I think the complexity between comparing, shall we say, the African American movement, the Dalit movement, is this, the fact is the gradations of caste that dominate our life in this country. I mean, you have caste within caste, within caste, within caste, within caste. That makes the unification of this conversation, or the coming together, far more difficult than an African American identity universally bringing people together. What we should do is celebrate this diversity and allow the diversity, shall we say, to drown all of us.
One question is, while he agrees that the maker of the instrument is as important as a musician to bring about the music, But how does one give credit to the maker? We can only see the musician on stage. We don't see the maker.
So nobody is asking you to honor the maker every time you get on stage and say, this is the maker. Don't do it. Don't need to. I mean, I've just given two things. One is a literal, I come to the literal thing a little later. But the question is both economic, social, and aesthetic. There are three parameters if you're going to put it, right? So let's look at the economic condition of the instrument makers. Let's look at their social condition. The fact is, both these are bad. So that means that automatically we don't respect the person's work. So fundamentally, one thing we can do is address this inequality directly. This is very obvious, right? Then there is the aesthetic respect. I mean, as musicians, how much do we respect the maker? I can tell you one thing, 99% of mridangam players don't know how a mridangam is made. I spent 4 years on it, so I know they don't know. In fact, the things they tell you about mridangam making, they have learned from the mridangam maker. But very rarely are you told they learned it from the mridangam maker. They will tell you that, you know, if you do this in this corner, this is not okay. Where did that person learn it from? One mridangam player actually told me about the fact that only that skin is better. He has never gone to an abattoir. He has never seen a cow being skinned. Who told him that? A mridangam maker told me, a senior man told me, who are these mridangam artists to give lectures on making? What do they know about it? So can we at least stop doing that? Stop appropriating knowledge? Shall we start respecting knowledge? This is one. But there's one simple thing that actually a colleague of mine suggested. Very simple. I mentioned my guru's name in a biodata. Can I mention the name of the instrument maker in my resume? Very simple thing. Very practical thing. I think that we can do, right?
Okay, here is a very interesting question. Your efforts to demarginalize and democratize and bring in more equity to the world of Carnatic music are awesome. But are you seeing the green shoots of reforms efforts anywhere, and what reforms and what resistance do you face?
Resistance we will leave aside. I mean, that's not a, I mean, the last thing I should complain about is resistance, because if I'm going to do something like this, there's going to be resistance, right? First, any cultural transformation is not something that's going to happen overnight. We have to understand that, you know, because we are talking about, we're talking about what you feel fundamentally, right? Which is why I said justice in music, just music. So it takes much longer than you and I can imagine for these transitions to happen. But I would stick my neck out and say that conversations on art and music today, not just certain kinds, are far more vibrant about these issues than they were a decade ago, without any doubt. That people are asking these questions confidently, publicly, and musicians are being challenged about their idea. You and I may disagree with them, that's a different thing altogether. But the fact that they have to respond, it also means that there is some movement. At very practical levels, I do see some little green shoots. But you always don't speak about good things that are happening when you want cultural change. You keep quiet and wait. It's quite possible that I am very limited. Let me say that out straight now. It's quite possible that my thoughts are still limited. They're conditioned by who I am. So, as long as I've enabled that, it's possible that more fascinating and more radical and more important things will happen in the next generation, 30 years from now. So, in the world of Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, I think we also want change to happen like that. We know that just because something goes viral doesn't mean something actually changes.
The problem is that, let's say in African American music or other forms of music, we can put in the current issues in the form of a rap or something of the sort. But the classical music that way, is it limiting, or we have not explored enough in that?
Well, this is a slightly more complicated question, so I'm going to avoid certain parts of it because that needs a long discussion. But the fact of the matter is, most privileged art forms in the world never ask difficult questions. Why would I ask difficult questions about myself when I'm very comfortable where I am?
Yeah, I think
so. There are only two ways it can happen. One way is I'm not the only one who belongs to that space, right? So which means participatorily it becomes diverse, okay? Or as people within, we recognize that it doesn't have to have multiple narratives, and I start changing narratives. Now that's the effort that I try a little bit in Carnatic music through the work with Perumal Murugan, or singing about manual scavenging as an issue in Carnatic music, or the other songs that we have brought in, both in Malayalam, multi-religious conversations. So these are ways in which I personally as a musician, I'm doing what I can, and what I see interesting is I see a few other people also doing similar things now, which means that there is a possibility to create multiple narratives. The best way to demolish any homogeneous structure is to create multiple narratives. It can happen through space, through person, or through form.
There's an interesting question. This could probably be the last or the second last question. Gandhi took to Narsi Mehta's Vaishnav Jan and Raghupati Raja as songs, and they became like anthems in those days. Did he get a lot of help from that music, or did that music help him achieve more?
Well, I'm not a Gandhi scholar, so I'm the last person who can answer that question. But, let's look at how these things usually happen, just to try and maybe understand. It's usually something that you first get personally. That makes the first connection, right? And then then your mind starts expanding that to the larger conversation you have. You could step back and make a psychological analysis and say even the fact that he found something personal was part of his rather political, social conversation. Accepted. So it's a chicken and egg story. So I'm not going to tell you which came first. But I think it comes from both the inner and the outer kind of being in harmony or in tandem, right? And it gives and it takes. It happens both ways. And that's the only way I can explain it. I don't know anything more about it.